There is a passage in the New Testament that almost no one talks about, and for good reason. The Apostle Paul, the man who wrote more books of the Bible than any other author, describes an experience so profound, so strange, and so dangerous to discuss openly that he buries it in the third person. He refuses to name himself. He says he does not know whether he was in his body or out of it, and then he says something even stranger. He heard words, actual spoken words, that he was not permitted to repeat, words that no human being is allowed to speak. And then he stops. He changes the subject immediately. He moves on to talking about a thorn in his flesh, and he never mentions the experience again in any of his letters. And for 2,000 years, readers have been left staring at 4 verses in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, wondering what on earth just happened, and more importantly, what Paul is not telling us. What did Paul see when he was caught up to the third heaven? Why does he describe it as paradise? And what were the words he heard? Words so sacred, so terrifying, or so transcendent that he was commanded never to write them down. Why would the apostle to the Gentiles, the man who revealed the mystery of Christ to the entire ancient world, be silenced on this one thing? To answer these questions, we have to go deeper than most Bible studies ever go. We have to enter the world of first-century Jewish mysticism, of heavenly ascents and chariot visions, of rabbis who entered paradise and never came back the same. We have to read texts that most Christians have never heard of. The Book of Enoch, the Talmudic accounts of the Pardes, the Merkavah traditions that shaped Paul's entire understanding of the cosmos. We have to understand what Second Temple Judaism actually believed about the architecture of heaven, how many levels there were, who dwelled in each one, and what happened to a human being who was granted access. And once we do all of that, 2 Corinthians chapter 12 stops looking like a strange footnote in Paul's biography and starts looking like a cipher, a coded message from Paul to readers who had the keys to understand it, and a deliberate concealment from those who did not. This is the third heaven cipher. Let me take you there. The year is approximately 55 or 56 AD. Paul is somewhere in Macedonia, perhaps Philippi, perhaps Thessalonica, writing what we now call his second canonical letter to the Corinthian church. But this is not a calm, reflective letter written from a place of rest. This is a letter written in anguish. It is arguably the most emotionally raw document Paul ever produced. He is under attack, and he knows it. There are men in Corinth, Paul calls them super apostles with bitter sarcasm, who have come into the church after his departure and are systematically undermining everything he has built. These men are not atheists or pagans. They are fellow Jews, fellow believers in Jesus, and they present themselves as apostles of the highest caliber. They are charismatic, eloquent, and deeply impressive in person. They carry letters of recommendation. They demand financial support from the congregation, which was standard practice for traveling teachers and philosophers in the Greco-Roman world. They claim to have visions. They claim to have direct revelations from God. They boast about their spiritual experiences openly, constantly, as proof that God speaks through them and validates their authority. And the message they are telling the Corinthians about Paul is devastatingly effective. Paul is weak. Paul is unimpressive in person. His speech is contemptible. He refuses to take money from you, which proves he is not a real apostle, because real apostles have the right to be supported. He has no letters of recommendation. His body is broken. He has been beaten, imprisoned, shipwrecked, and humiliated everywhere he goes. How could a man like this possibly be an authentic messenger of the risen Christ? Paul is furious, but he is also trapped. He knows that if he plays their game, if he starts boasting about his own spiritual resume and his own credentials, he will become exactly what he despises. He will validate their entire framework. But if he says nothing, if he remains silent while the super apostles poison the Corinthians against him, the church he planted with his own tears might abandon the gospel he brought them entirely. Everything is at stake, not just his reputation, but the future of the Gentile mission itself. So Paul does something remarkable. In chapter 11, he sarcastically matches the super apostles' boast for boast, credential for credential, but with a twist so sharp it draws blood. Let me read you what he actually says. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I am a better one. I am talking like a madman, with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless beatings, and often near death. And then he lists what those credentials actually look like. 40 lashes minus 1. Received 5 times. 3 times beaten with rods. Once stoned. 3 times shipwrecked. A night and a day adrift at sea, in danger from rivers. Danger from robbers. Danger from his own people. Danger from Gentiles. Danger in the city. Danger in the wilderness. Danger at sea. Danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. Do you see what Paul has just done? The super-apostles boast in their strengths, their eloquence, their visions, their financial success. Paul boasts in his scars. His apostolic credentials are not written on parchment in elegant Greek. They are carved into his back with Roman whips. This is an absolutely devastating rhetorical inversion. Paul is saying, you want to compare resumes? Let's compare resumes. Mine is written in blood. And then in chapter 12, he finally addresses the one thing the super-apostles boast about most relentlessly: heavenly revelations and direct encounters with the divine. He says, and listen to the reluctance in his voice, I must go on boasting, though there is nothing to be gained by it. I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. And then he drops the bomb that has puzzled readers for 2 millennia. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows, and I know that this man was caught up into paradise. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And he heard things that cannot be told, which man may not utter. Stop right there. Let this sink in for a moment. Paul is talking about himself. Everyone knows it. The third-person mask is paper thin. He opens the chapter saying, I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord, and then immediately says, I know a man. The grammatical shift is so obvious that no serious scholar in 2,000 years has doubted that Paul is referring to his own experience. But the question is, why? Why would Paul, the most influential theologian in Christian history, the man who shaped the entire doctrinal framework of the early church, describe the single greatest spiritual experience of his entire life as if it happened to someone else? The answer is in the text itself. Look at verse 6. Though if I should wish to boast, I would not be a fool, for I would be speaking the truth, but I refrain from it, so that no one may think more of me than he sees in me or hears from me. Paul is doing something almost unheard of in the history of religion. He is deliberately diminishing his own spiritual experience. He is shrinking it, burying it, hiding it behind a grammatical disguise, and then immediately pivoting away from it before anyone can ask follow-up questions. The super-apostles would have shouted their visions from the rooftops. They would have written books about them. They would have charged admission. Paul buries his in 4 cryptic verses, wraps it in a third-person riddle, refuses to elaborate on anything he actually saw or heard, and then immediately transitions to talking about his greatest weakness. This is not false modesty. This is not a humble brag. This is a theological statement of staggering importance. Paul is saying something that cuts against the grain of almost every religious instinct humans have ever had. The content of the revelation matters less than the character it produces. And the character it produces is humility. Dependence on God, not boasting in spiritual credentials. What you have seen in heaven is not your identity. Your identity is what heaven has done to you. And in Paul's case, what heaven has done to him is make him weak enough for God to use. But here is where this passage becomes a cipher, and this is the part that almost every modern reader misses completely. Paul expects his audience to understand what he means by the third heaven. He does not explain it. He does not define it. He does not pause to give a theology lecture on the architecture of the cosmos. He simply drops the phrase, the third heaven, and assumes the Corinthians already know exactly what he is referring to. This means that the concept of multiple heavens, and specifically a third heaven that was identified with paradise, was common knowledge in first-century Jewish and Christian communities. And if we want to understand what Paul actually experienced, we have to recover that knowledge. We have to reconstruct the cosmology he inherited. In the ancient Near Eastern worldview, and specifically in the Jewish understanding of the cosmos during the Second Temple period, the universe was not a single infinite space stretching out in all directions. It was structured, it was layered, it had levels, and each level had a specific nature, a specific purpose, and specific inhabitants. The first heaven was the visible sky, what the Hebrew Bible calls the rakia, the firmament or expanse. This is the atmosphere where birds fly and clouds form and rain falls to the earth. When you look up and see the blue of the sky, you are looking at the first heaven. Genesis chapter 1 describes God creating this expanse on the second day, separating the waters above from the waters below. This was the realm closest to Hum and #97. N experience, the boundary between earth and everything beyond. The second heaven was the realm beyond the atmosphere, the domain of the celestial bodies. The sun, the moon, the planets, and the stars all dwelled in the second heaven. This was the realm of cosmic order, of the great lights that God placed to govern the day and the night, to mark seasons and days and years. In many Jewish texts, the angels responsible for the movements of the heavenly bodies, the angels of the seasons, the angels of the stars, resided in the second heaven, carrying out their appointed tasks with precision and obedience. And then there was the third heaven. The third heaven was something else entirely. It was not the realm of weather or the realm of stars. It was the dwelling place of God. It was paradise, the garden where the righteous dwell in the presence of the Most High after death. It was the throne room of the universe, the center of all reality, the place where the Creator's presence is most fully manifest. When Paul says he was caught up to the third heaven and then immediately equates it with paradise, he is drawing on a cosmology that his readers would have recognized instantly. This three-tiered model was not unique to Paul. It appears across Jewish literature of the Second Temple period. The Testament of Levi, a Jewish text from approximately the 2nd century before Christ, describes a vision in which Levi is taken up through multiple heavens and sees the throne of God in the highest one. The Apocalypse of Moses describes Adam being taken up to the third heaven after his death, but the most detailed and the most important description, the one that almost certainly shaped Paul's own understanding, comes from a book that most Christians today have never read, and that Paul almost certainly knew intimately. The book is called 2nd Enoch, also known as the Slavonic Book of Enoch, or the Book of the Secrets of Enoch. It was preserved in the Old Church Slavonic language and belongs to the Eastern Orthodox canon in some traditions. The Russian Orthodox Church and the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition both hold it in high regard, though it was never accepted into the Western Protestant or Roman Catholic biblical canon. The text claims to describe the journey of the patriarch Enoch, the same Enoch from Genesis chapter 5, the seventh from Adam, the man who walked with God and was not, for God took him. In 2nd Enoch, that enigmatic phrase from Genesis is expanded into a full cosmic tour. Enoch is carried up through multiple heavens by angels, witnessing the secrets of creation at each level, until he finally arrives at the throne of God himself. In 2nd Enoch, there are not 3 heavens but 10, and in chapters 8 through 10, Enoch arrives at the third heaven. And what he sees there is so precisely aligned with Paul's brief description that the connection cannot be coincidental. The third heaven in 2nd Enoch is divided into 2 radically different regions, placed side by side with only a boundary between them. In the northern part of the third heaven, or in some manuscripts, simply in one half, is paradise. And the description is breathtaking, an indescribably beautiful garden, filled with flowering trees of every kind, heavy with ripened fruit that never fails. A sweet fragrance, unlike anything on earth, permeates the entire realm. 4 rivers flow through the garden, the same rivers described in Genesis chapter 2. The Pishon, the Gihon, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. In the very center of this garden stands the tree of life, at the exact place where God himself comes to rest when he descends to dwell with the righteous. The text says it is more wondrous than all other trees, in appearance like gold and crimson, like fire in form, and it covers the entire paradise. 300 angels, singing with voices of incredible beauty, Guard this garden night and day, never ceasing. This paradise is prepared as the eternal dwelling of the righteous. All those who have walked with God, from Adam to the final generation, will be gathered here after the last judgment. But then Enoch sees something that makes his blood run cold. The other half of the third heaven, in the southern part, separated by a boundary only God can cross, is a place of unspeakable torment. The text describes a prison of ice and freezing, suffocating darkness where the wicked suffer in agony, waiting for the final judgment. A river of fire flows through one section, burning without consuming. Merciless angels stand guard with instruments of torture, carrying out the sentence that has been pronounced against the disobedient. The contrast could not be more absolute. Paradise and punishment, beauty and horror, the fragrance of eternal life, and the stench of unending death, all existing within the same heaven, separated by a boundary that no human being can cross and no angel can alter. This is the world that Paul was drawing from when he said he was caught up to the third heaven and immediately identified it as paradise. He is not inventing a new concept. He is using language and cosmological categories that would have been instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with the Enochic traditions, which, in first-century Judaism, meant almost everyone. The Book of Enoch and its related texts were widely read and deeply influential. Fragments of the original Aramaic text of 1st Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, proving that the Enochic corpus was in active circulation well before Paul's time. The New Testament letter of Jude actually quotes 1st Enoch directly, calling it prophecy. Paul did not need to explain what the third heaven was, because his readers already knew. He could say third heaven, and their minds would immediately go to the paradise described in Enoch, to the garden with the tree of life, to the boundary between the blessed and the condemned, to the place where God's presence dwells in unapproachable light. But here is where the cipher deepens significantly. Paul does not simply say, he went to the third heaven. He says he heard words. And the Greek he uses to describe those words is absolutely critical to understanding what he is and is not telling us. The phrase Paul uses is Arrēta Rhēmata, inexpressible words or unspeakable sayings. That word Arrēta carries a powerful double meaning in Greek. And Paul is almost certainly exploiting both meanings simultaneously. On one level, Arrēta can mean something that cannot be expressed because it exceeds the capacity of human language. Something so transcendent, so far beyond ordinary experience, that there simply are no words in any human tongue that could adequately convey it. If you try to describe the indescribable, language breaks down. It is like trying to explain the color blue to someone who has been blind from birth. The categories do not exist, but on another level, and this is the level that most scholars now recognize as primary, Arrēta can mean something that must not be expressed, because it is sacred, because it is forbidden. It is the language of the mystery cults, of the secret rituals that initiates were sworn never to reveal to outsiders on pain of death. The Greek mystery religions, the Eleusinian mysteries, the cult of Dionysus, the Orphic rites, all used this word to describe the sacred knowledge that was revealed only to the initiated and sealed with oaths of silence. Paul, who grew up in Tarsus, a major center of Greco-Roman culture, would have known this usage intimately, and Paul makes it even more explicit. He follows Arrēta Rhēmata with the phrase which man may not utter, using the Greek expression ouk exon anthropo lalesai. That word exon means permitted or authorized or lawful. It is the same word used in legal contexts for something that is prohibited by law. Paul is not saying he could not find the words because the experience was too overwhelming. He is saying he was forbidden to speak them. There was a command. There was a prohibition. He heard words in the third heaven. He understood those words, and then he was told, by God himself, or by the angel who guided him, or by the direct authority of the throne, that these words were not for human ears. They were sealed. They belonged to the heavenly realm, and were never, under any circumstances, to be repeated in the earthly one. This raises a question that has haunted interpreters for 2,000 years, and it is the question that makes this passage a true cipher. What could possibly be so sacred, so dangerous, or so transcendent that Paul of Tarsus, the apostle to the Gentiles, the man who received the revelations from the risen Christ and wrote them into the foundation documents of the Christian faith, the man who was not afraid to confront Peter to his face in Antioch over a point of doctrine. What could possibly silence this man? There are three major theories that scholars have developed across the centuries, and each one of them reveals something critical not only about Paul's experience, but about the nature of divine revelation itself. The first theory, and in many ways the most straightforward, is that Paul heard the actual language of heaven, what some ancient Jewish texts call the tongue of angels. This is not a metaphor or a poetic expression. In the Testament of Job, a Jewish text from roughly the 1st century before or after Christ, the dying patriarch Job gathers his daughters around him and gives each of them a sash or a cord, a physical object that, when worn, enables them to speak in the angelic dialects. One daughter speaks in the language of the cherubim, another speaks in the language of the seraphim, the third speaks in the language of the powers, the language used by the angels who govern the cosmos. These are not hum languages. They are not Aramaic or Hebrew or Greek. They are the native tongues of beings who dwell in the direct presence of God. And their sounds, their syntax, their very structure are utterly alien to anything that Humnan vocal cords can produce. Paul himself mentions tongues of angels in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and he mentions them in a way that suggests he believed they were real, not hypothetical. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Paul is saying, even if I could speak the language of heaven, which is an extraordinary claim to make in passing, without love, it would be nothing but noise. The implication is almost certainly that Paul believed he had spoken, or at least could speak, in such tongues. If Paul heard the angelic tongue spoken directly in the presence of God, if the words he heard were in the language used by the cherubim and seraphim around the throne, then repeating those words in hum, U0061N speech would be impossible, not merely because they were forbidden, but because hum U0061N physiology literally cannot reproduce them. The sounds might not even be sounds in the way we understand sound. They might be something closer to pure meaning, communication, that bypasses the ears entirely and implants itself directly in the soul. To translate the tongue of angels into Greek or Aramaic would be like trying to paint a symphony or sculpt a fragrance. The medium simply cannot carry the message. But there is a second theory, and this one is darker, more unsettling, and in many ways more interesting to scholars who have spent their careers studying Paul. The second theory is that Paul saw something in the third heaven that, if revealed, would fundamentally alter, or perhaps shatter, the way human beings understand the relationship between God and creation. Not a secret doctrine or a hidden teaching, but something far more concrete. Perhaps Paul saw the full scope of divine judgment, the books that are opened on the last day, the fate of every soul that has ever existed, written in volumes that no human eyes were ever meant to read. Perhaps he saw the inner workings of the heavenly court, the deliberations between the Father and the Son, the mechanism by which grace and justice are balanced and applied, the calculus of redemption. Perhaps he saw the timeline of history, every empire that would rise and fall, every war and every peace, the exact date of the Lord's return. To speak of these things openly would be to place into human hands knowledge that belongs to God alone. It would be to violate the boundary between the created and the uncreated, between what humans are permitted to know and what belongs exclusively to the divine mystery. The early church understood this boundary deeply. The Didache, one of the earliest Christian documents outside the New Testament, instructs believers to pray the Lord's Prayer 3 times daily, but it does not record the words of the Eucharistic prayer, because that prayer was considered too sacred to be written down. The apostolic tradition of Hippolytus from the 3rd century preserves prayers that were to be spoken only by the bishop in the presence of the baptized faithful. There was a category in the ancient church for knowledge that was true, but not public, not because it was false or shameful, but because it was holy. Paul may have been operating in exactly that category. The words he heard in the third heaven were true. They were real. They were the most important words he ever encountered, and he was commanded to seal them away forever, to build the entire edifice of his theology around a central silence that only he and God would ever share. In the third theory is the most intriguing, and it is the one that connects Paul's experience to a much older, much deeper stream of Jewish spirituality that most Christians have never been taught about. It connects 2 Corinthians 12 to the tradition of Merkavah mysticism. Merkavah is the Hebrew word for chariot, and in ancient Judaism, it referred to an esoteric mystical practice centered on the chariot vision, recorded in the first chapter of the Book of Ezekiel. In that vision, one of the most overwhelming passages in the entire Hebrew Bible, Ezekiel is standing by the Kebar Canal in Babylon during the exile when he sees a storm wind coming out of the north. A great cloud with flashing fire and brightness all around it. In the center of the fire is something like gleaming metal, and out of the fire emerge 4 living creatures, beings of a kind Ezekiel has never seen and struggles to describe. Each creature has 4 faces: the face of a human, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle. Each creature has 4 wings, their legs are straight, their feet are like the hooves of a calf, and they gleam like burnished bronze. Beside each creature is a wheel within a wheel, a structure so complex and so alien that Ezekiel can only describe it in approximations. The rims of the wheels are tall and awesome and full of eyes all around, and when the creatures move, the wheels move with them. For the spirit of the creatures is in the wheels. Above the creatures is an expanse, shining like crystal, and above the expanse is a throne, the color of sapphire, and seated on the throne is a figure like a man, surrounded by radiance like a rainbow. And from his waist upward and downward, Ezekiel sees what looks like fire and brilliant light. And when Ezekiel sees this, he falls on his face, because he knows he is looking at the likeness of the glory of God. For centuries after Ezekiel, certain Jewish sages meditated on this passage with an intensity that is difficult for modern readers to comprehend. They sought not merely to understand the vision intellectually, but to experience it themselves, to ascend through the heavenly palaces and the angelic guards, to traverse the chambers of the divine realm, to arrive at the throne of God and behold his glory with their own eyes. This practice, known as descent to the chariot, despite being an ascent, was considered extraordinarily dangerous. Perhaps the most dangerous thing a human being could attempt. It was taught only to the most spiritually mature, never to a group larger than 2 or 3, and never ever casually. The Talmud preserves an account that has become one of the most famous and haunting passages in all of rabbinic literature. It appears in Tractate Haggadah, chapter 2, and it describes 4 great sages, the giants of early rabbinic Judaism, who entered the Pardes, the orchard, the garden, the paradise, from which we get our English word. These 4 men were Ben Adzai, Ben Zoma, Elisha, Ben Abuya, and Rabbi Akiva, the greatest sage of his generation, the man around whom the tradition of the Mishnah would eventually be organized. Of the 4, only one emerged unharmed. But let me tell you what happened to each of them, because this story is the key to understanding what Paul is doing in 2 Corinthians 12. Ben Azai was the youngest, the most brilliant, the one everyone expected to surpass, even Rabbi Akiva. He entered paradise, and he gazed upon the divine glory. And the Talmud says simply, he gazed and died. The Hebrew word implies not a passive seeing but an active, penetrating stare. He tried to take in more than a mortal soul can contain, and his soul was consumed by what it encountered. Some traditions say he was consumed by fire. Others say his soul simply separated from his body, unable to return. The scripture the sages applied to him was from the Psalms. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. Ben Adzai entered paradise, saw the glory, and never came back. Ben Zoma was next. He entered paradise. He gazed upon the divine glory, and he went mad. His mind, brilliant as it was, shattered under the weight of what it was asked to process. He lived the rest of his life in a state of permanent dislocation, unable to distinguish between the heavenly vision and earthly reality. The Talmud records fragments of his teachings after the event, cryptic sayings about the distance between the upper and lower waters, about the nature of creation, about what separates one realm from another. And reading them, you can feel a mind operating on a different frequency from everyone around it. Ben Zoma survived, but the man who came back was not the man who entered. Elisha ben Abuya suffered the most famous fate. He entered paradise, he gazed upon the divine glory, and he became a heretic. He saw something in heaven that caused him to abandon his faith entirely. The Talmud records that he saw the angel Metatron seated on a throne, recording the merits of Israel, and he said, "Perhaps there are two powers in heaven." The idea of any being other than God seated on a throne was so theologically destabilizing that Elisha could not reconcile it with the strict monotheism he had been taught. He left the faith. He became known afterward only as Acre, the other one, and his name was never spoken in the study halls again. When he died, Rabbi Meir, his most devoted student, prayed, "When he dies, let smoke rise from his grave," an ancient sign of divine judgment, because Elisha had been given the greatest revelation and had thrown it away. And the Talmud records that when Elisha ben Abuya died, smoke rose from his grave for 7 days. Only Rabbi Akiva entered paradise in peace and departed in peace. The Talmud adds an intriguing detail. The angels wanted to harm Akiva too, but God himself intervened and said, "Leave this elder alone, for he is worthy to behold my glory." Akiva alone had the spiritual maturity, the grounding, the integration of knowledge and practice to encounter the divine presence without being destroyed by it. And even Akiva did not escape unscathed. Not truly. Decades later, during the Bar Kokhba revolt against Rome in 132 to 135 AD, Akiva was captured by the Roman authorities for teaching Torah in defiance of an imperial edict. The Romans sentenced him to death by 2072 Chur. They would flay him alive, tearing the skin from his body with iron combs while he hung exposed before the crowd. The Talmud records that, as the executioners carried out the sentence, the time for the recitation of the Shema arrived, the prayer that every faithful Jew recites twice daily. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And Akiva began to recite it. His students, watching their beloved teacher being tortured to death, cried out, "Master, even now, even to this extent?" And Akiva replied, "All my life I have been troubled by the verse, 'You shall love the Lord your God with all your soul,' meaning, even if he takes your soul. I have wondered when I would have the opportunity to fulfill this, and now that the opportunity has arrived, shall I not take it?" He recited the Shema, drawing out the final word, Echad, one, until his soul departed. The sages of the Talmud, reflecting on this story, asked, why did Akiva die this way? Why did the greatest of them all, the one who entered paradise in peace and departed in peace, meet such a horrifying end? And the answer, whispered between the lines of the tradition, is that the heavenly vision marks you. No one who enters the Pardes returns to an ordinary life. The revelation reorders everything. Your priorities, your fears, your relationship to the world and to your own body. You cannot see what Akiva saw and remain the same person. The cross-shaped death of the greatest rabbi is not a contradiction of his heavenly vision. It is the completion of it. Glory and suffering, ascent and sacrifice, paradise and the execution ground, they are not opposites. They are the same pattern, written at different scales. And this is where it all comes together. Paul, before he was Paul, was Saul of Tarsus, a Pharisee of the tribe of Benjamin, a student of Gamaliel, the greatest rabbi of his generation, trained at the feet of the most rigorous school of Jewish scholarship in Jerusalem. He knew the Hebrew scriptures inside and out. He could quote entire books from memory. And he would have known about the chariot vision of Ezekiel. He would have read it, studied it, discussed it with his teachers, heard the whispered traditions about the sages who entered paradise and what happened to them. The story of Ben Adzai, Ben Zoma, Elisha ben Abuya, and Rabbi Akiva, even if it was not yet written down in the form we have it, it was circulating in oral tradition among the rabbinic schools. Paul breathed this world. It was the air he moved in, and when he writes to the Corinthians about being caught up to the third heaven, he is placing his experience directly into the stream of this mystical tradition. But Paul inverts the tradition in a way that is so radical, so theologically brilliant, that it reveals everything about why his gospel was different. The Merkavah mystics sought ascent. They climbed, they meditated on the chariot vision. They recited the sacred names. They performed the rituals and the purifications. They navigated the angelic guards and the heavenly palaces through discipline and knowledge and spiritual effort. They achieved access through mastery of the tradition. The entire framework of Merkavah mysticism is built on the idea that the adept, through sufficient preparation and purity, can ascend to the throne. Paul was seized. The Greek verb he uses, harpagenta, is not a gentle word. It is not the word for a voluntary journey or a meditative ascent. It is the word for a violent snatching, a kidnapping, a forcible seizure. It is the same word Paul uses in 1 Thessalonians to describe believers being caught up to meet the Lord in the air. It is the word used in the ancient world for a thief grabbing valuables and running, or a predator seizing prey. Paul is saying with absolute clarity, I did not achieve this. I did not earn this. I did not climb the ladder of spiritual discipline until I arrived at the throne room. I was ambushed. I was taken against my will, or at least without my initiation or permission. The heavens opened, and I was pulled through. This is the grace inversion. The Merkavah tradition says, the worthy ascend. Paul says, I was unworthy, and I was caught up anyway. The super apostles in Corinth said, our visions prove our authority. Paul says, my vision proved nothing, except that God chooses whom God chooses, and the criterion is not human impressiveness. The entire theological structure of Paul's gospel, justification by faith apart from works, grace as unmerited favor, the cross as the inversion of all human hierarchies, is embedded in this single Greek verb. He was seized, and this brings us to the most contested question in the entire passage. When did this happen? Paul gives us exactly one chronological marker, and it is maddeningly vague: 14 years ago. If 2 Corinthians was written around 55 or 56 AD, then 14 years earlier places the event around 41 or 42 AD, that is roughly 7 to 8 years after Paul's conversion on the Damascus Road, which most scholars date to approximately 33 to 34 AD. This was not his conversion experience. The Damascus Road was one thing, a blinding light, a voice from heaven, a direct encounter with the risen Jesus. The third heaven was something else, something that happened to Paul years into his apostolic ministry, perhaps during the period he spent in Tarsus after his conversion, or during his time in Antioch before the first missionary journey. We do not know exactly. Paul deliberately withholds the details, the location, the circumstances, the duration. All we know is the year and the fact that it happened. But some scholars, including N.T. Wright in his monumental study, Paul and the Faithfulness of God, have suggested a tantalizing possibility. What if Paul's Damascus Road experience was itself a form of third heaven ascent? In Acts chapter 9, Saul is struck to the ground by a light from heaven. He hears a voice that identifies itself as Jesus of Nazareth, the one Saul is persecuting. He sees the glorified, ascended Christ speaking to him from the heavenly realm. The men traveling with him hear the sound but see no one. Saul is blinded by the light, and for 3 days he neither eats nor drinks. A period of darkness and silence that mirrors the 3 days Christ spent in the tomb. When Ananias comes to pray for him, something like scales fall from his eyes, and he receives the Holy Spirit. Is this a third heaven experience? Some would argue, no, because the text of Acts presents it as an encounter on the road, not a journey into heaven. Saul is struck to the ground. He is not lifted up, but Paul himself, in precisely the passage we are examining, says he does not know whether he was in the body or out of the body. The boundary between earth and heaven, between vision and physical experience, between bodily location and spiritual transport, these are precisely the categories that Paul refuses to adjudicate. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. Paul had experiences in which the normal coordinates of existence broke down. He could not tell you whether his body remained on the road to Damascus while his spirit stood before the throne, or whether he was bodily transported to the third heaven and then returned. The distinction, for him, was meaningless, because in the presence of the glorified Christ, all such distinctions collapse. The veil between heaven and earth becomes so thin that it might as well not exist at all. What we can say with complete confidence is this: Paul's theology was not built primarily on study, argument, or tradition, though he was certainly capable of all three. It was built on revelation. He insists on this throughout his letters, with a vehemence that sometimes bordered on defiance. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. He wrote that to the Galatians, and he meant every word of it. The doctrine of justification by faith alone, the mystery of Christ dwelling in the believer, the cosmic scope of redemption that would eventually embrace Gentiles and Jews in one body. All of it, Paul claims, came to him not through the Jerusalem apostles, not through the study of Scripture in the rabbinic academies, but through direct, personal, unmediated encounters with the risen Lord. The third heaven experience was the well from which Paul drew everything else. Every letter he wrote, every church he planted, every theological argument he waged, all of it flowed from that moment when he was seized into paradise and heard words that cannot be spoken. And yet, and this is the paradox at the very heart of the passage, the experience that shaped everything about Paul's gospel is the one experience he refuses to describe. The super-apostles in Corinth would have written books about a third heaven vision. They would have made it the centerpiece of their speaking tours. Paul gives it 4 verses, 4 cryptic, reluctant, third-person verses, and then immediately pivots, almost with relief, to the one thing he actually wants the Corinthians to remember: to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations. A thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan, to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Notice the structure of chapter 12. Paul begins at the absolute summit of spiritual experience. A human being, however briefly, standing in the direct presence of God in the third heaven, hearing words spoken by the divine voice. And he ends in the valley, a thorn, a torment, a humiliation, a weakness so persistent and so painful that he begged God 3 times, with the same, a desperate intensity that Jesus prayed in Gethsemane, to take it away. And God said no. The same God who gave Paul the vision also gave Paul the thorn. The same hand that opened heaven also pierced his flesh. And Paul, after years of struggling with this, came to understand that the 2 gifts were not contradictory. They were complementary. The revelation and the thorn came from the same source and served the same purpose: to make Paul a vessel of divine power rather than a monument to human achievement. What was the thorn? After 2,000 years, the question remains unanswered, and that is almost certainly deliberate. Paul never names it, and by leaving it unnamed, he makes it universal. It is your thorn and my thorn, as much as it was his. But the theories that have been proposed across the centuries are worth examining, because each one illuminates a different facet of what Paul was trying to communicate. Some of the church fathers, Tertullian and Jerome among them, believed the thorn was physical. Paul himself mentions bodily ailments elsewhere. In Galatians, he says he preached to them because of a bodily ailment, and he praises them because they did not despise him, even though the condition was a trial to them. Some have suggested he suffered from severe headaches, perhaps migraines so debilitating that he could not travel or write for days at a time, which would explain why he was so dependent on companions like Timothy and Silas to carry his letters and represent him in person. Others have suggested malaria, which was endemic in the coastal regions where Paul traveled, and which produces cycles of fever, chills, and weakness that would have made his missionary journeys a form of physical to 072 cure. Still others, noting that Paul's handwriting was unusually large. "See, with what large letters I am writing to you with my own hand," he says in Galatians, have speculated that he suffered from an eye disease that made reading and writing painful and difficult. This would be particularly poignant for a man whose entire identity was built around the study and transmission of texts. John Chrysostom, the great 4th century preacher of Constantinople, identified the thorn not as a physical condition, but as a person, or rather, a group of people. He believed the thorn was the Judaizers themselves, the opponents who followed Paul from city to city, arriving after he left to undermine his teaching and attack his authority. Everywhere Paul planted a church, these men arrived to uproot it. Every time Paul thought he had established a community on solid ground, they came behind him sowing doubt. The thorn, Chrysostom argued, was the constant, exhausting, demoralizing awareness that his work was under attack from within the family of faith. Martin Luther, 16 centuries later, took a different approach. Luther, who spent his entire adult life in what he described as spiritual warfare, believed the thorn was the constant assault of the devil, not a physical illness and not human opponents, but direct, personal spiritual attack, temptation, accusation, the voice that whispers in the darkness that you are not good enough, that your sins are too great, that your faith is a lie and you are a fraud. Anyone who has engaged seriously in any form of spiritual work knows exactly what Luther was talking about. The closer you draw to the light, the darker the shadows become. John Calvin, characteristically, refused to speculate. He argued that the thorn was deliberately left undefined so that every believer could see their own suffering in it. Whatever your thorn is, physical, emotional, spiritual, relational, the answer is the same. And the answer is not healing. The answer is not deliverance. The answer is grace. Sufficient grace. Grace that does not remove the suffering, but transforms it into something that can be used for glory. But the most important thing to understand about the thorn is not its identity. It is its placement. Paul deliberately structures 2 Corinthians 12 so that the third heaven, vision and the thorn are inseparable. The chapter begins with glory and ends with weakness, because in Paul's theology, glory and weakness are the same thing, viewed from different angles. The man who heard words that cannot be spoken is the same man who begged God 3 times to remove his suffering and was told no. The apostle who saw paradise is the same apostle who was mocked, beaten, shipwrecked, imprisoned, and eventually beheaded on the Ostian Way outside Rome. This is what it looks like to follow a crucified Messiah, a king whose throne was a cross, whose crown was made of thorns, and whose greatest triumph looked to everyone watching like the worst possible defeat. So what did Paul see? We have traveled through the cosmology of the ancient world, through the Enochic literature and its vivid descriptions of paradise and punishment in the third heaven. We have descended into the mystical traditions of the rabbis, the Merkavah ascents, and the 4 who entered the Pardes and were shattered or transformed, or both. We have traced Paul's life from Tarsus to Damascus to Corinth, reconstructing the world of meaning he inhabited, the texts he read, the traditions and he was trained in. We have examined the Greek vocabulary he chose with such precision. Harpagenta, the violent seizure, Arrēta, Rhēmata, the forbidden words, uk, exon, the divine prohibition. And at the center of it all, after everything we have uncovered, we are left with a silence. Paul heard words. He did not write them. He saw something. He did not describe it. He was in the presence of God, however briefly, however incomprehensibly, and he came back changed, not changed in a way that made him impressive to the Corinthians, changed in a way that made him useful to God. Perhaps that is the deepest cipher in this entire passage. The third heaven is not a destination Paul invites us to seek. It is not a goal to be achieved through meditation or ritual or spiritual effort. Paul was taken there against his will, shown something he could never explain, and then given a thorn to keep him grounded for the rest of his life. The experience did not make him a super apostle. It made him a servant. It did not give him power over others. It gave him dependence on grace. The third heaven led directly to the thorn, and the thorn led directly to the words that became the foundation of his entire ministry. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And if I could venture one further thought, and this is where we must be careful, because we are now in territory Paul refused to enter. Perhaps the words he heard in the third heaven were not some secret doctrine or hidden cosmic mystery at all. Perhaps they were the simplest words in the universe, words so fundamental, so primal, so close to the heart of reality that human language cannot contain them without shattering under the weight. What does God say when no prophet is listening and no scripture is being dictated? What does the Father say to the Son in the place where they are alone together, before creation, beyond time, in the silence that is not empty but more full than all the noise of all the worlds combined. Paul heard those words, and for the rest of his life, he tried to translate them into everything he wrote. Romans, Galatians, Ephesians, the letters to Corinth, the desperate, loving, scorching letters to churches that barely understood what they had received. Every epistle is an attempt to put into human speech something that belongs to a different order of reality entirely. Every argument about justification, every meditation on grace, every plea for unity and holiness, all of it is Paul circling around a center he could never directly name, pointing toward a silence he was forbidden to break. And the reason Paul was commanded never to repeat the exact words he heard is that they cannot be repeated, they cannot be translated, they cannot be reduced to doctrine or written into a book. They can only be lived. The third heaven experience was not information Paul received, it was transformation he underwent, and the evidence of that transformation, the only evidence Paul was willing to present to his skeptical, doubting, super-apostle, entranced Corinthians, was not a transcript of heavenly secrets. It was a life poured out like a drink offering, a body covered in scars, and a stubborn, inexplicable joy in the middle of suffering that Paul called simply grace. If this deep dive into the most mysterious passage in Paul's letters has opened your U0065S to patterns in Scripture you have never noticed before, me a favor, hit the like button right now. It only takes a second, but it tells the YouTube algorithm that content like this deserves to reach more people who are hungry for depth. And while you are here, drop a comment with the one question you still have about the third heaven. What do you think Paul heard? What do you think the thorn was? I read every single comment in the first 48 hours, and the most compelling answers often become the topic of future videos on this channel. Now, if you want to go further, because what we have covered today is only the beginning, the very next video in this series decodes something even stranger. In the book of Revelation, John sees a scroll in the right hand of God, sealed with 7 seals, and no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth is worthy to open it. No one, that is, except one, a lamb standing as though it had been slain. And the seals themselves, the 7 seals, correspond to a pattern of judgment and redemption that the patriarch Enoch wrote down more than 2,000 years before John was even born on the island of Patmos. That video is aired right here on the screen. Tap the card now, or find it in the description below. You are not going to believe what the cipher reveals when the seals begin to open. And one last thing, if you have made it this far and you are not yet subscribed, I want to ask you directly, Bible Cipher exists for people like you, people who know there is more beneath the surface of Scripture than what we were taught in Sunday school, people who are willing to do the hard work of digging, of studying, of reading the ancient texts most Christians have never heard of, to find the patterns and connections that have been hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. If that is you, and if you are still watching this video, it probably is, hit that subscribe button now, turn on the bell so you do not miss a single upload, because we are just getting started, and the next cipher is already waiting to be decoded. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.